The Houston Texans have run the AFC South for a couple seasons, but I see a step back coming in 2025. I'll explain why on today's edition of Locked On Titans.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, it is time for our second division rival deep dive as part of Divisional Rival Week. Can't wait to talk about what the Houston Texans have done, adding players, losing players, changing coaches. We're going to hear from John Hickman from Locked On Texans, and I'm going to tell you why I do think the Texans take a small step back in 2025. Before we get into all of it, though, do want to thank you for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. Speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. Couldn't do it without you guys. If you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one. It may be summer break for the Titans, but there is no summer break for Locked On Titans. There is no off season for Locked On Titans. It's 5 days a week, all year round, never slowing down. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. 25 years as a Tennessee Titans fanatic. I've covered the team for USA Today, Sports Illustrated, hosted the #1 Tennessee Titans podcast, Locked On Titans, for 6 seasons. But with that being said, the Houston Texans, again, have led the division for 2 years now. All right, they've got playoff wins in 2 straight seasons. That is pretty solid work. It's hard to look down your nose at that sort of activity. I would love for the Tennessee Titans to be back in that situation once again. Now, here's the reality, though. It wasn't all pretty for the Texans last year. And quite honestly, you talk to some Texans fans and some people around the team, they would tell you that, the vibes were not great last year, even though they won a playoff game and they won the division and all of that. It felt like they weren't living up to their potential, and they knew it. So this year, they make massive changes on the offensive side of the ball. And quite frankly, it's all in an effort, I think, to get CJ Stroud back on track. Stroud looked absolutely fantastic. Bona fide top 10 quarterback. His rookie season looked awesome. But Stroud took a major step back last year. And having Nico Collins injured and the injuries to the wide receiver and all of that, that mattered. All right, the offensive line wasn't great. And clearly, they had some issues with offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik, who was let go after getting head coaching interviews just a year before that. Now he's gone. They're getting a new offensive coordinator. So although things seem on paper, back-to-back playoff wins, back-to-back division titles, although things seem great, it's a lot of change for a team that on paper looks like they had good 2 years. Why are they making so many changes? And not only that, not only did they change their offensive coordinator, but look what they've done on the offensive line. They traded away Laremy Tunsil, one of the top 5 left tackles. I'm sorry, but if the protection of your young quarterback is paramount, and your offensive line did not do that great last year, your answer to that is to trade away your top 5 left tackle? Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. So they lose their offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowik. They let him go. I say lose, but they got rid of him on purpose. They trade away Laremy Tunsil. They lose their 2 guards. Kenyon Green was terrible, though. Shaq Mason didn't have a good year, but, Shaq Mason's okay. You lose Stephon Diggs as well, which I remember going back to last year after they traded for Stephon Diggs. I was like, man, when you redid his contract, you really set yourself up to lose that second-round pick for nothing. Now, they still have a pretty good wide receiver group, and we'll talk about that. But, they've made a lot of change and shook up a lot of things on their offensive line. And I don't necessarily know if, they fixed anything. And we'll talk about that when I tell you what I think they're going to do this season. Again, I think they take a small step back. But they did add talent as the Texans have done. They add CJ Gardner-Johnson. He's a tad unreliable, and will he stay healthy this year? The Eagles didn't bet on it. If the Eagles couldn't wait to get rid of him, I don't know. They trade for Christian Kirk. Has also had his own health issues, but seems healthy now. Seems like a good fit for them. They bring in Cam Robinson to be their left tackle, who, remember, Cam Robinson got traded from Jacksonville to Minnesota after the Christian Darrisaw injury last year. And Cam Robinson was bad. So you go from Laramie Tunsil to Cam Robinson at left tackle, and even if your young drafted guy, they draft Ariante Ursery, offensive tackle out of Minnesota in the second or third round. If he gets in the starting lineup, you think that's going to be anywhere close to Laramie Tunsil? Ursery is a project. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me if I'm CJ Stroud. Like, what are we doing there? They add Laken Tomlinson that should help at guard. They add Ed Ingram to compete at guard. They add Trent Brown, the huge offensive tackle who flamed out in Cincinnati last year, to add some depth maybe to the other offensive tackle spot, where they're going to have Blake Fisher, a second-year player who's a mid-round rookie out of Notre Dame in the 2024 draft. They had Darrell Taylor, who I think is a really good, solid, rotational edge rusher. I think he could be like the new Yannick Ngakoue. Maybe not that good, but in that mold. Sheldon Rankins on the interior defensive line. They did bolster some areas. They bring in Nick Chubb. Listen, he'll have an okay season, but Nick Chubb isn't the Nick Chubb that you're thinking when you hear his name. And they bring in Nick Caley to be the new offensive coordinator, who has New England Patriots ties, which that organization, with Nick Caserio on down, a lot of Patriots ties. So, of course, they would do that. But I think the biggest question clearly is all of that change going to make CJ Stroud better? Is all of that change going to get CJ Stroud back right? Because I think here's a reality. Here's a reality that Houston Texans fans will not want to hear. And that I've been, oh, yeah, right, way, blah, blah, blah. But if CJ Stroud plays bad this season, looks bad again, like, whoa, why did we think this guy was a top 10 player? This guy is a maybe top 20 player. If CJ Stroud looks bad again, if the offensive line is significantly worse, which in my opinion on paper it looks like it is, if the offensive coordinator does not work out, Nick Caley is not an improvement over Bobby Slowik, where do the Texans go? And what questions do they ask themselves? I think they ask themselves, man, the most important thing in our entire organization is CJ Stroud. And we know that he's capable of being a top 10 quarterback. So how do we get CJ Stroud to be a top 10 quarterback? Also, if you combine a potential step back record-wise, the incentives of continuing down the path lessen. So I'm just saying there could be a conversation after the season about what the best direction for the Texans is moving forward, and that could result in a potential hot seat situation for a coach that most people would say it's asinine to consider that he would be on the hot seat. But I'll save that full conversation for when I tell you what I think the Texans do this season. But ultimately, the change on offense and how much further they can go, can they take that next step and win a second playoff game? That'll be how the Texans are judged. And quite frankly, that's a very, very high bar to clear for your season to be considered a success, which creates a big area of disappointment land. Like, that makes disappointment land huge for the Texans. A lot of potential outcomes that could result in disappointment for their fan base and a small little tiny window for them to feel happiness. Tough spot to be in, but not everyone agrees with me. And I think John Hickman, my guy from Locked On Texans, may not fully agree with that assessment either. Let's get the inside scoop on the Houston Texans. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, well, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending, all in one place. Stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on online shopping, and now I can budget smarter, I could save more, and instead of doing that with juggling multiple apps, I can use Monarch to check my finances, track my spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, so continuing the division rival week here that I'm having on Locked On Titans, my favorite part of every episode of the deep dive into a division rival is the crossover section. Of course, we have John Hickman from Locked On Texans on the show to break things down. John, obviously, the Texans, 2 years back-to-back, playoff wins. Yeah. Things last year were weird, right? Because it didn't look as good, but yet the team still accomplished good goals that any team in the NFL would want. Just what's your general feel about the team right now? Because they've been successful, but it felt weird last year.
This is the year Texans got to get over the hump. They got to win a divisional playoff game this year. I think there's nowhere around it. If we're honest about the AFC South, our division isn't the strongest when we look around the landscape of the NFL. Truth. So it does feel like any given year, any given season, we could see a team kind of swing it. However, the Texans have positioned themselves to be the top dogs in the division. So the division isn't really like a worry right now, at least for me. I think every team has gotten better, but the Colts. I think the Tennessee Titans have gotten a lot better. They finally have a quarterback, and I think that's going to make a difference for you guys. I think Jacksonville will be in a better position. But for Houston, it is all about, especially when you look at some of the decisions that were made in the offseason, kicking it off with moving on from Bobby Slowik, they got to be able to get to a divisional game and win a divisional game. That's been their Achilles heel the last couple of seasons, and that's what's been holding them back.
Do you think the biggest move of the offseason for the Texans then is that change from Bobby Slowik to Nick Caley at offensive coordinator, or would you point to something else maybe as the biggest move of the offseason for the team?
I think it'll be 60-40 Bobby Slowik, Laremy Tunsil. And with Bobby, you look at some of the things that really hurt the Houston Texans last year. The reports that right now we've heard coming out of the locker room, coming out of the facility is Bobby didn't take well to player involvement in terms of what the players wanted to do. It was more so trust the system. And that really hurt Houston a lot of times in second halves of games, and you guys were able to sneak a dub against the Houston Texans last year, right? So moving on from your offensive play caller who did win 2 playoff games with you,
right?
That's major. But also moving on from perennial Pro Bowler, one of the best pass blocking left tackles in the NFL in Laremy Tunsil. That's major because they didn't necessarily replace him with a guy that you have the absolute trust will be able to fill the void of Laremy Tunsil. Cam Robinson's here in Houston. Obviously, you know a lot about Cam Robinson as he played in Jacksonville. You've been covering Tennessee Titans for 6 years now?
6 seasons, yeah. This will be year 7. It's crazy.
Goodness gracious, man. We got some grades grown in, but we know a lot about Cam Robinson. We know the highs, we know the lows. He's fitting. He's going to fit here in Houston, but he's no Laremy Tunsil. So how will you protect your franchise quarterback in his blind side, but also a first-year play caller in Nick Caley replacing Bobby Slowik? Those are the 2 major storylines, and ultimately those will be the 2 major reasons why we'll see Houston rebound from a quote-unquote disappointing sophomore year under DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, or not rebound, have the same failures, and we see CJ Stroud get hit and sacked over 50 times.
So I have to lay this out. You know, everybody says, oh, the media, they spin their narratives. Look, I don't know if I can call myself the media, but I'm spinning a narrative. I have a question for you. So the issue with having a defensive-minded head coach is getting the offensive coordinator position right multiple times. It's not just once. You can't just get it right once, because you get it right, that offensive coordinator is going to get hired to be a head coach, and then you got to get it right again, okay?
Yeah.
That's how the Eagles just won that Super Bowl, right? They get to the Super Bowl with their coordinators. Both of them leave to be head coaches. They have a down year because they replaced them with bad replacements, and then once Sirianni gets the replacements right again as a CEO head coach who isn't a scheme lord on either side, now they're ready to go succeed. Is there any worry in Houston that the ownership group could look, if you have another season, let's say the Texans win 9 games and go to the playoffs but lose in round 1, you know, what seems like a step back? Is there any worry that, or maybe you wouldn't be worried about it and would agree, that maybe DeMeco Ryans is on the hot seat, maybe not this year, but next year, because he can't get CJ Stroud right, and that's the most important player in the franchise?
No, I don't think it'll be DeMeco Ryans let go. I think it'll be we'll start to hear those chatters about Nick Caserio. And let me say something, because I don't want – this will also air on Locked On Texans. I don't want people to confuse what I am saying. Nick Caserio has done a phenomenal job of pulling this franchise out of the mud when Deshaun didn't want to play here anymore. Like, that was a huge story, and I think the last 2 seasons for Houston – maybe some people locally or nationally have forgotten how bad the Houston Texans were for a few years. So he's done a very good job of getting Houston out of that place, bringing in CJ Stroud and Will Anderson in the same draft. Derek Stingley, who's an all-pro cornerback. Nico Collins, who a lot of people feel like is a top 12 wide receiver in the NFL.
Probably
Kamar
higher.
Lassiter, probably higher. So he's done a very good job. With that being said, he has yet to be able to find real protection for the quarterback position.
Yeah.
King Green's in Philly, and there was a report about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks, he got beat on 11 consecutive plays. Offensive line has not worked out for Nick Caserio.
Yeah.
You can also look at the moves that were recently made. Nick Haley, Cole Popovich, they come from a New England background. So if they struggle in 2025 and the offense doesn't take a step forward, and the offensive line doesn't take a step forward, then those ties, I think, can eventually come back to bite Nick Caserio. So I don't think it'll be DeMeco. I think it'll be more so Nick Caserio. This is year 5 on a 6-year contract that he signed. He has 1 year left. Houston could look to move on if he does not, and if the moves don't pan out for him.
Yeah, that's fair. You could say, hey, we have the right head coach. We just need more out of the roster on offense to move forward. That's a way to look at it for sure. My last question for you really is this. What are your expectations for the Texans this year? And I mean, listen, we're going to have our division rival crossover before the season, as we always do. But just right now, where things are at moving forward, where do you think the Texans are going to be this year? And do you think they take that step forward into the final 8 teams in the NFL?
Man, you know, Tyler, that's tough, man. Back-to-back division champs. Yep. They got a dub on Wild Card Weekend, back-to-back years. And then back-to-back years, they either face the best team. they face Kansas City or Baltimore in the AFC South.
Yeah. Lamar, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Good luck.
It's tough. I absolutely think the Houston Texans are the 4th best team right now in the AFC based off of how 2024 ended, right? You could say Baltimore, Buffalo, and Kansas City.
Yeah.
For Houston, I do think realistically it's just getting to an AFC championship game. Yeah. I don't want to take a shot. Super Bowl, I don't want to be unrealistic about it, but they got the quarterback to do it, I believe so. They've invested in their playmakers, and I think that they've done a better job of raising the floor of the running back unit. Nick Chubb is now here in Houston. Of the wide receiver unit, they brought in some vets, so they don't have to rely on some of those younger receivers. It's just about getting to the AFC championship game for me. And I think that they can. I think we'll have to see how the season starts. LA Buccaneers to kick it off. That's going to be 2 big tests for the Houston Texans to determine the type of team that they have.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. They have such a narrow window for what success is considered. It's just a tough place to be when you're facing the competition in the AFC that you are. But with that being said, I got more on the Texans, going to give my predictions for what the Texans do this year here on my episode of Locked On Titans. Today's episode is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. I love that it's completely online. Rugiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rugiet website for full safety information. Fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, doing a Houston Texans deep dive. We talked about all the moves that they made early in the show. We talked to John Hickman from Locked On Texans. Now I want to give my kind of summer prediction on what I see from the Houston Texans. Before I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. As training camp gets closer, moves are being made. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Again, I see a small step back from the Houston Texans this year. I think that the offensive line is significantly worse. Again, you go from having Laramie Tunsil at left tackle to Cam Robinson to a rookie and Ariante Ursery to Trent Brown. I mean, if the Cincinnati Bengals don't want this guy on their offensive line, what are we doing? Blake Fisher, we talk about the left tackle spot. Why do people think that Blake Fisher is going to become a competent starting level offensive tackle right away? Like, there's a lot of internal support for Blake Fisher, but why? They've moved Titus Howard inside the guard. Titus Howard is a pretty decent player, but I just don't see it. I'm sorry. I don't see it. Jared Patterson is not that good at center. Cam Robinson is not good at left tackle. Laken Tomlinson is okay. Titus Howard is good. Blake Fisher is unknown. And we know that Trent Brown can't be relied on, and they have Ed Ingram, and that's great. Sure, make that trade. But what? Juice Scruggs getting put to the bottom now? Ariante Ursery, is that? They just have so many question marks. It's like what they tried to do is they tried to go quantity over quality. They're like, instead of having Laramie Tunsil on this huge contract, we're just going to trade him out. We're going to sign a bunch of guys on smaller contracts. And since we signed a bunch of different options and we drafted a bunch of different options, and we got so many different players, like we have Cam Robinson, Ariante Ursery, Trent Brown, Blake Fisher, all at tackle. We have Ed Ingram, Titus Howard, Laken Tomlinson. Two of those guys are going to be good guards. We have Jake Andrews and Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson. One of those guys is going to end up being a good center. Like, they've just said, hey, we're just going to get as many bodies as we possibly can in here, and somebody's going to work out, right? And look, sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it does not work out. So I think that offensive line is going to be absolutely terrible. And I know that their defense is going to be great. Their defense is going to be great. And I know that they have good weapons. Look, I like their wide receivers. Kirk, Nico Collins, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, Braxton Berrios even. Like, they added Justin Watson from Kansas City, who's a solid player. They still have Xavier Hutchinson. They still have John Mechie. They're going to get Tank Dell back from injury eventually. Like, they have a ton of weapons. But you can only have so many of those guys on the field at one time. And if the offensive line is breaking down, it's the meme that we all remember from the Bengals, Lions, Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase decision of the, wide open wide receiver, good quarterback, but no offensive line. He's sacked. They could just turn into a new version of the Bengals. Just they didn't reach those heights and their crash comes earlier. So I think the Texans do take a step back. I think that they are a 10-7 to 7-10 team. I think if the offensive line is as bad as it seems, then they are going to end up 8-9, 7-10. They miss the playoffs. And again, I'll cap off the show with this. If the Houston Texans finish 7-10, they miss the playoffs, the offense doesn't improve, the O-line looks worse, CJ Stroud looks worse. Massive disappointment for ownership, for the fan base, for the players, the organization, everyone. And I don't think that it would mean that DeMeco Ryans would be fired. I don't. No way. No way. But that sets up an offseason where I think we go into it saying, hey, DeMeco Ryans is on the hot seat. DeMeco Ryans is on the hot seat. And that would be wild, right? Imagine going in the time machine to last offseason, coming off that playoff win over the Browns, and saying, hey, 2 years from now, DeMeco Ryans is on thin ice. Because here's the problem. Again, CJ Stroud is the number one asset in the franchise. And if you're starting to go backwards, and this problem that has caused you to start to go backwards is a problem because you have a defensive head coach. And a defensive head coach is great if they can get the OC right. And not just get the OC right once, you got to get it right multiple times, because once you get the OC right, they're going to get hired as a head coach somewhere else because people want offensive play callers as their head coaches, because it avoids this issue that the Texans are getting ready to dive into right now. This is why. So it's like everybody go back and look, Nick Sirianni and Mike Vrabel and Mike Tomlin and Dan Campbell and all these CEO leader type coaches. Well, the downside to that is if you can't get offense right, it doesn't really matter. You need your quarterback to be at max capacity to win. And you need someone who's going to get the best out of that quarterback. Period. And that's why having a defensive head coach or a CEO leader type head coach who doesn't call offensive plays, that's why it's tough. But with that being said, we got Indianapolis tomorrow. That is going to round out division rival week. That's going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.